Many thanks to Barbara Tuchman, who wrote a book called The Guns of August in the early 60s or late 50s. And it was a very popular book and, in fact, guided President Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis against starting a war by mistake. And it goes through how World War I happened upon the world, and it's worth recounting and revisiting that story, I guess because it's August. The world of 1914 could not imagine the kind of slaughter that took place in World War I. Wars were civilized affairs where you'd send out your army and you'd get relatively light casualties, and one side would surrender and they'd lose a little bit of territory and the other one would gain a province or two. The exception was the American Civil War, which was a bloody, grinding war of attrition, particularly at the end, that presaged World War I, but nobody was watching or listening to the lesson. And everybody assumed that Europe could not go into a war because everybody was related to everybody else. The Kaiser of Germany was the grandson of Victoria, the Queen of England, and he was related to the Tsar of Russia. And everything was so intertwined that nobody imagined that the family would fall apart and there would be a war. It's almost like a family feud. But alliances were built up so that each side had a network of commitments and it felt it was bound by them, particularly so because they had no idea what kind of storm would be unleashed in the war, that it would permanently change the world and would take all of these monarchies with them. The unraveling of Europe began when the Archduke, the successor to the throne in Austro-Hungary, visited Serbia and was touring Sarajevo when a member of the Black Hand, the Serbian revolutionary group, assassinated the Archduke. At that time, Serbia was an independent country, but Bosnia, right over the border, was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which spanned most of Central Europe. And the Serbians were trying to free Bosnia from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, very reminiscent of the fight that took place in the 1990s during the Clinton administration. After the assassination, Austro-Hungary sent an ultimatum to the Serbs that contained a lot of grievous conditions, most of which Serbia was willing to bow before. But one of them required that they admit Austrian authorities into Serbia and let the Austrians conduct the investigation into the assassination. And that was a cession of sovereignty they were unwilling to make, so they rejected the ultimatum. Austro-Hungary then declared war on Serbia. In the meantime, Russia, under the Tsar, had always seen itself as the leading Slav nation in the world and the protector of Slavs. They saw the world as Slavs versus Teutons, Germany versus Russia. And when Austro-Hungary declared war on Serbia, they felt obliged to come to their defense. Now, the problem is that the Russian army was huge and mobilization was very difficult. It took months to mobilize the army, millions and millions of men without a decent railway structure. So the Russians either had to be counted out or mobilize early. And they chose to mobilize early, which sent a warlike message throughout the rest of Europe. And Russia then declared war on Austro-Hungary. Now, Germany was part of a treaty with Austro-Hungary and was obliged under the treaty to come to Austro-Hungary's defense. The reason that there was that treaty is that Britain and France had gotten together and formed what was called an entente, which was like NATO. It was an alliance of those two countries with Russia. And Germany felt surrounded by Russia, France, and Britain and needed some ally of its own. So they created the Central Powers, Germany and Austro-Hungary, in the middle of Europe against the two flanks. Austro-Hungary demanded that Germany declare war on Russia entering this conflict. Kaiser Wilhelm tried to deter the Austrians from attacking and tried to get out of having to declare war on Russia, but ultimately he was compelled to do it because of the alliance structure and he risked a huge loss of credibility if he didn't. Ironic in that he lost his throne because he did. Once Russia was at war with Germany, France was obliged to come to the defense of Russia, and it did. And the French declared war on Germany, and Germany on France. But there still was the matter of Britain, which said that the only way it could get into the war is if France itself was attacked, that this was a defensive alliance, not an offensive one. Now, the Germans felt that in order to win the war with France, they had to invade from the north, come in through Holland and Belgium and push south, which would split the British Expeditionary Force that would be near the Channel and the French army, which was near the German border. And Germany did so, and in the course of doing it, violated the neutrality of Luxembourg and Belgium. And that forced Britain into the war. Belgium had been created 70 years before, when the Spanish, who used to control Holland and Belgium, were chased out. Not 70 years before, actually, 200 years before. And when the Spanish were chased out and Holland and Belgium became independent, the British insisted on setting up the country of Belgium, which was sort of an artificial entity, half carved out of France and half carved out of Holland. And they guaranteed its neutrality, they guaranteed its sovereignty. It was really seen by the British as a hedge against invasion, because you couldn't invade Britain unless you did so from Belgium and Holland. And that was a very solemn commitment the British made. That was really the foundation of their whole foreign policy. So when the Germans invaded Belgium, the British had to come to France's aid, and they declared war on Germany, and Europe was off. By the time it ended, there were 10 million dead. There was a communist regime in Russia. France was permanently crippled as a world power. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was broken up into many different feuding nationalities. Germany lost a massive amount of territory. Poland was eliminated as a country, and all kinds of horrible things happened. You could argue that World War I started in 1914 and didn't finish until 1991, when communism fell in Russia and the Eastern European satellites were free, and that the last consequences of World War I didn't end until 1991. Thanks for watching.